Thank you all for coming, especially on a Friday afternoon. I'm very impressed, I have to say, that you've come late in the week to come and listen to these presentations. I've noticed that we've got all the parents down one row, we've got a lot of teachers down the other side. I have the advantage of knowing a lot of people in this audience. And of course some of the parents are also teachers, and some of the teachers are also parents, so we'll see what happens in the course of the evening. But anyway, thank you very, very much for coming. I want to tell you that I'm a local boy. I don't look like I am, but I consider myself to be a local boy. I arrived 3 years ago, and I arrived probably on the worst day to come to Kolkata. I came here on Independence Day, and nobody has warned me. And I was so happy that there were no cars on the streets. And I excitedly sent a text to my wife and said, "This is a kind of heavenly place. There are no cars." And of course, the next day I came out and I was heavily disamused and disillusioned after that. But I'm not a parvenu, actually. It's possible, looking at the audience and how young you all are, that I was here before any of you. Because I came to India as a schoolboy when I was 17. And one of my most vivid memories was gathering around one of those ancient radios we used to have in those days, you remember, crackling, and listening to Indira Gandhi announce the war with Pakistan. That was in 1971, so now you can guess how old I am. And it was it was quite a difficult time. I don't know if any others of you remember it. And I was in Delhi, and it was a little bit paranoid, and a little bit, the atmosphere was a bit volatile, and there were blackouts, and there were some bombings. And my friend who I was traveling with and myself, we decided to get out of the city as quickly as possible. And we got on a train to travel to Lucknow. And the most unlikely thing happened. Somebody on the train got very excited and accused us of being Pakistani spies. And we had to get off the train. And that was a big mistake, because we had to wait 3 minutes for the next train. So those are my founding experiences of India. I'm pleased to say they've improved since then. And of course I spent the last 3 years managing Oaktree International School, which is in its early years, it's in its infancy at the moment. Anyway, to get on to the main topic, raising a future-ready child. Let me say to the parents and the teachers, don't panic. Because if you think about the future, you might be inclined to panic and think that the future is out there and we can't prepare for it, and we can't prepare children for it. And almost it's a bit like preparing a robot if we work too hard at it. And what I'm going to really be saying today is, don't work too hard. We may find out that there are some fundamental qualities to education that we merely need to reinforce and endorse. And that is the best way to prepare children for the future. Now, I've got to have my Tagore quote, of course. That's Regan here in West Bengal. And I found one this morning, and I'm going to misquote him, I hope you'll forgive me. But he was talking about children and the education of children. And he said words to the effect of, don't imprison a child in your own time. I thought that was absolutely wonderful. You know, you are born in your time, but your child is born in another time. And I think all of us as parents and teachers, we do make that mistake. And it's very obvious now what happens, because those of us of a certain generation do have problems with the digital revolution. I don't know if any of you have the same problems I do, that you're sitting by the TV with your son, aged 6, and you don't know how to set it. And he gets up and gives you a look of chilling contempt, and then fixes it for you. But that's happening in every home throughout the world. And I think that's a wonderful example of how one generation changes from the other generation. So that's the first thing I want to say. Don't let's imprison children in our own time, let's set them free. And actually it's very, very difficult to set children we're constantly repeating the same picture of the future and saying to our children, this is how we're going to prepare you for that future. And it's quite a dangerous thing to do. We seem to believe that if one thing is not going to destroy us, another thing will. We're always looking at a dystopian future. If global warming is not going to kill mankind, global terrorism will. If global terrorism fails, we're going to have a deep impact meteor attack. If we don't have that, we're going to have a global war. We're going to have a war between USA and China. If that doesn't happen, we're going to have a rogue nuclear attack. Now, one of those things may happen, but the fact is, none of them may happen. And I believe, and I make this mistake myself, we're constantly speaking to children and lecturing them about the future and saying, if you want to be ready for that future, this is what you've got to do. And maybe they get a bit fed up with it. And I think they do. Because we need to allow our children to create their own futures. It's actually their future. And that is another skill that we've got to give them. We've got to give them the skills of imagination. No, I changed that. We need to encourage in them their imagination, their intuition, their love for discovery and exploration. And somehow we've got to encourage that. First of all in the home and then in schools. And that's a very, very difficult thing to do. So that's really the first thing I want to say. Let's help children to make the future and encourage them to do so, because actually they can make the future. They can make it in the actions they do. And if they believe in free will, and are not fatalistic about events, they can create the future. So in a sense, it's not us preparing children for the future. Let's help children and young people prepare themselves for the future. That's the first thing really I want to share with you. That's the view I've come to after many years in education and having made many mistakes, I have to say. Second thing I want to talk about is the trends which come and go in education. And I'm very suspicious of those trends. I'm going to give you some examples of where these trends have failed. And of course there are fundamental patterns which are good. And it's interesting, if you go right back to the time of Aristotle and Cicero, you will find that they're talking about education the same way we are. It's exactly the same. They're looking at the same problems. They're even looking at preparing children for the future in the way that we are. But there are also some dangerous trends. These are political, economic, social, historical, and they're educational as well. In the past, we've educated children for war. We've educated children for work. We've educated children for religion. Now, I think, finally, there is some kind of convergence globally, for the first time, globally, on what we're educating children for. So I think we are now at a very crucial point. So it's actually a very exciting time to be in education. And interestingly, for teachers and maybe parents are not aware of this, this is a golden age for what they're calling cognitive science. I'm not talking about neuroscience, I'm talking about cognitive science, about the study of the way people are thinking and learning. And so we've now got a much better, a much more thorough, comprehensive body of empirical evidence about how children learn. And that's really helpful to the education. So there is a very useful convergence now. And I also think, in spite of what I said 10 minutes ago, I also believe that there is some reasonable convergence of what the world is coming to look like. And this is the first time, actually, probably this has happened right across the world. So I could make this presentation in India, I could make the same presentation in England, the United States, Malaysia. I did make a similar presentation in Malaysia 2 weeks ago. And everyone understands it. So it's quite interesting that this is really the effect of globalization. We've got economic globalization, but we're also getting a globalization of values. And this is the world that our children are now coming into. So we are globalized, we're more international, we have primarily market-based economies. that it was going to give India a huge advantage in the next 30 years. Now, that has already changed. And they're now talking about this becoming a demographic nemesis, because that surplus population that's coming through in India may not have these skills to fill the new jobs that are coming through in the job. So the employment challenges for the next 30 years are very, very important for us to consider when we are preparing children for the future. Before I move on to away from the sort of political context, I think it's true to say that capitalism and socialism have both failed to guarantee equality in their own ways. So although we are becoming increasingly richer, we're also becoming more unequal across the world. I think we all know that. So one of the things we have to do in helping our children is to help protect them from becoming less equal in the future. So we need to give them the skills to do that. So first of all, I said we have to help them create the future. Secondly, we have to help them develop the skills so they can survive in a very, very competitive employment context, which is already the past. Okay, now I want to turn to the role of parents now, and I want to give you some good news. Parents have all the advantages when it comes to raising children. Now, that may seem like a very obvious statement, but you know, it's not necessarily so obvious, because there have been times when the evidence has pointed to education as being the main driver for the development of the students. And of course, over the last 100 years, there's been a nature versus nurture debate. Our children, is the future of what each child, is the destiny written in their genes, or is it the environment? Now, the good news is that you as a parent will give your child unconditional love. You will give your child unconditional love. There's no question about that. And there is now a huge body of evidence that it is that one factor which is the most important thing for any human being. To have received the unconditional love of at least one person. And that's going to be you, parents. But can you imagine the child who doesn't receive that? They are already at a disadvantage on the first day of their life. So if you are giving your child unconditional love, and I'm sure you are, then you're already setting your child on the right path. And there is a further evidence that one in five of any population anywhere in the world, in any group, is suffering or has suffered from anxiety. And one of the main causes of anxiety is lack of unconditional love at the time when it was first time. And one of the things that we have to do in schools is watch out for anxiety in children. It's no good doing this, preparing them for the future, if that child is full of anxiety. You have to deal with the anxiety first, before you can do the rest. Now, the second advantage that parents have is that they're in charge of nature and nurture. You've got it all. In those first 4 years of life, you are doing more for the child than a school can do in 20 years. So it's those first 4 years of life that are most important. And of course, you're in charge of nature because they've got your genes, and you're also in charge of nurture because you're giving them the environment. So you are giving the child everything that they need in those first 4 years of life. So the home is the paramount influence of the child. And all that the parent needs to do is some very simple things if they want to prepare the child for the future. It's actually very, very simple. It doesn't matter how much money people have got. The more important thing in the home is books. If there are books in the house, chances are that child will develop normally and be able to learn well. So books are more important than money. It's true. The parent will also give opportunities to I was speaking about my adventure in 1971 was because I've had my adventure, and it was a great forming experience for me. I'm not proposing that everyone gets on the train in India to have their adventure, but everyone needs their adventure. So parents need to encourage risk in their child and encourage exploration. If you don't do that, you're not doing this. Simple as that. So it's the first 4 years that are really important. And the final thing, and this applies to parents and teachers, is don't treat your child like experts. It may seem like a very obvious statement, but actually it's one of the cardinal sins we commit in schools when we're not preparing our lessons. Doesn't matter what subject we're teaching, if we're teaching the child with an assumption that they're already an expert, we are losing them. And what we have to do in schools is, first of all, we have to create a framework for each subject. So we know what mathematics is, we know what science is, we know what literature is. But you need to create that framework, first of all, so the child knows that they're doing mathematics and not literature. And then underneath that, you then create standards. And then underneath the standards, you create developmental objectives. So you need to develop the learning of every child developmentally. And that is very, very important in preparing the child for the future. So that's very much on the cognitive side. What about on the character side? Well, the buzzword these days is resilience. Resilience. This is the word you'll hear a lot now when you go to conferences. Resilience is the major attribute now, and it impacts on many other things. What do we mean by resilience? Well, first of all, it's perseverance. If you get knocked down, you've got to stand up again. And if you get knocked down again, you've got to stand up again. And so on and so forth. How many children can do that? And when children do fall down, and they do, of course, what do we do? Do we help them to get back up again? And for parents and teachers, that's our duty. You have to help them to get back up again. And by doing that, you're developing resilience and perseverance. And you need to not be frightened. Children need to not be frightened of failure. And I think this is one of the... I was asked to say a few words about Indian education. I'm not going to, because I'm not going to claim to be an expert on that. I'm not. But I think one of the things I've seen is a tendency to try and achieve perfection in children. You can't. There's no such thing as perfection. And I don't think we should use that word. Because if we search for perfection, then we're going to put children off taking risks. So encourage children to take risks. Don't be frightened of failure. Reward effort and create a safety net when children fall down. Now, I mentioned earlier that this is a kind of golden age of cognitive science. And I also said that I was going to describe one trend that's become discredited. And I'm using this as an example because really what I'm saying is let's keep looking for new solutions. Let's stick with what is tried and trusted. I'm going to come to that at the end. But the example I'm going to give is the whole notion of multiple intelligences. Now, psychologist and neuroscientist Howard Gardner wrote a very famous book about 20 years ago. And in this book, which is called Multiple Intelligences, he said that we all have 8. We don't have one intelligence, we have 8. And he listed them. Obviously, there's literary, verbal, artistic, and so on. Now, that was a very reasonable thing for him to say, but the education establishment got hold of it, and they put this into schools and said, you've got to teach multiple intelligences. So teachers are running around frantically, trying to decide if this child is better to be taught with pictures, this child is better to be taught with words. Okay, I'm exaggerating in case you don't know. That has now been totally discredited by the findings from predominant in one intelligence, that doesn't matter. You shouldn't be allowing that to dictate your teaching. You should teach children in the same way. Now, if I had said that 10 years ago, I might have been heavily criticised, and I'm saying it very confidently today because it's been backed up by a lot of evidence. So what am I coming to? Because I'm really saying, don't let's get carried away by trends. Let's stick to what's tried and trusted. So I'm now going to share with you what I think is tried and trusted. I believe there are three pillars which entitle us to be called educated. Three pillars. And I can go back and quote Aristotle, as I've said before, Thomas Aquinas, Tagore, many others. And they're all saying the same thing. So really there's nothing new. First one is we need cognitive skills. We need to know how to think. We need thinking skills. We need to be able to learn. We need to learn how to learn. And then we need the higher order skills, planning and decision making. And we need, so that's number one, and we need to help children develop those skills. And frankly, if there's anything that's new that's coming on now in schools, it's an agreement that these skills are important. And it's possible they have been ignored, and they're still being ignored. So if there's anything new, it's that we're focusing on cognitive skills. And that's very important. And we hear the buzz phrase, critical thinking now, a lot. We're always telling children to think critically, but they must think critically. And critical thinking is more than just reasoning, logic, reductionism, it's more than that. It's about applying thinking skills in any situation in which you find yourself. And it's also about taking a very skeptical attitude towards any claim that someone has that they have knowledge. It's a very healthy thing to have. It's very healthy to be skeptical. And that's what we encourage children to be. Don't follow anything that ends in the three letters ISN. That's what I always do. If it ends in ISN or OLOGY, be very skeptical. Doesn't mean it's wrong, but just check it out first. You know, the last century was full of isms, communism, fascism, Nazism, and look what it did. It really messed up the world. And I think one of the most hopeful things about this century is we've put that behind us. And by encouraging children to think creatively, that's the best thing we're doing think critically. That's the best thing we're doing to prepare them for the future. And it's only by doing that that they can create their own future. So that's the first thing. Second pillar is personal qualities, personal attributes. And again, this is something that's not new. It's come in the form of what's called virtue ethics. The IB program, we are an IB school, they call it the learner profile. It's a raft of qualities that you need to be a successful, educated human being. I can give a few: courage, empathy, resilience, reflection, and so on. But this is the moral dimension. You are not educated if you don't have morality. Education without morality it's only half an education. And so that's the moral dimension. And the third thing, and this is quite controversial in some areas of the educational establishment, is that we need a fact-based view of the world. The argument about whether rote learning or interactive learning is more important, or whether skills or facts are more important, is a complete red herring, in my view. You cannot have skills without facts, and you cannot have facts without skills. You need both. And we as educators and parents, we need to make sure children have got both and can develop both. So to be educated, children need a fact-based view of the world. And they cannot inquire without facts. So don't ignore facts in looking for skills. But that does beg the question, what facts? And that is something I'm not going to get into today. I've already gone on too long. But clearly, just reciting a list of names, let's say capitals of the world, or the longest rivers. I imagine there's a few people in this room who've had that kind of education. I certainly had it. can still tell you the 10 longest rivers in the world. It's a totally useless piece of information, actually. So I'm not talking about those kind of facts. I'm talking about three fundamental factual areas. One is literacy, the other is literacy, and the third is scientific literacy, which tends to get ignored. So there is a body of facts that children need. You need facts to scaffold the way to inquiry, and so on. So to summarize,